So hello everybody, and very welcome to all of you. This is the third and our last in our UDL focus series. So we're looking today at embedding UDL in practice through the use of technology in this session. So we've really got to ask ourselves this question today, because technology is ever present. It's not going anywhere, it's here to stay. So how can we really embed technology to support all of our diverse learners in our classroom through universal design for learning practices? Well, that's what we really want to think about today. And of course, UDL, Universal Design for Learning, isn't just about technology. It's actually a framework or a teaching approach for creating learning environments and learning experiences that are accessible and effective for all of our students. So UDL can be applied to other aspects of the classroom that are not technology, but today specifically, we are going to be looking at UDL through the lens of technology and looking at lots of different tools and things that we can use within the classroom and how to embed those in practice. So anybody that has ever been to a session with Paddy before will know that he always talks about the Titanic. So Paddy, if you could explain why there is a big picture of the Titanic in the slideshow, that would be fantastic.
I'm also glad, Carrie-Ann, that you said this was about technology, because if you were going to say it was about something different, I would have had to leave rather early. Technology is, of course, what drives me in terms of engagement, in terms of teaching practice. But I would say that you've heard from Carrie-Ann a lot about technology. You're going to hear an awful lot about technology from me as we go through here. But the overriding factor here is the pedagogical approach. This is about teaching and learning, and really making sure that the technology is there for the scaffolds. And most importantly, what I hope you're going to see are the choices that we can give to students to remove barriers and to enable UDL in the classroom. And we want to look very carefully at how we can embed those to a fairly simple, straightforward sort of scaffolded grid, almost guided UDL, if that doesn't sound like a contradiction in terms. But yeah, you're right, Carrie-Ann. Titanic, why the Titanic? There's a couple of reasons. Obviously, I'm very proud of Belfast, which is my hometown. And we get taught in school about Titanic from we're literally 4 years old. Honestly, until we're about 18, they forget to tell you the point that, you know, the biggest ship ever built here was the only ship that sank from here. So it has its ups and it has its downs, but it provides a lot of good analogies for me. But actually, just today, what I'm going to do is use Titanic as kind of the theme going through the teaching and learning aspects of today. So if we think about something like a very straightforward Wikipedia page about Titanic, how do we bring the UDL principles to bear on that, and what technology would we use to expand the horizons of learning, remove the barriers, and give pupils a bit more choice when they go? So you've heard from Carrie-Ann there. Carrie-Ann is head of our international business, and I am head of education here at Texthelp. Some of you may well not have heard of us, and that's okay. We're not here to sell anything. We work very closely with our good friends at ECIS to make sure that we are talking about teaching and learning principles and talking about learning design, particularly through this technology piece. But if you haven't heard of us, you may well have heard of tools like Read and Write. And we're going to touch upon that really briefly, but I promise only in the context of UDL and to illustrate some principles. This is not about a product demonstration or anything along those lines whatsoever. I've just said that, and then I've realized that one of the key things that you're going to actually see demonstrated are two products that are not from us that are really, really, really going to help you when it comes to UDL. And I'll mention them just at the outset. One of them is Ludia, which is an AI tool from the wonderful Beth Stark. I'm going to show you how that can really help you in your UDL practice, and how it can really support you and be there at all times and look at everything you do through UDL lens. And then we're going to be looking at a thing called Diffit. And I'm not sure whether you've seen this, but Diffit gives us, again, another AI tool. And I know I'm sounding like this is turning into an AI session. It's not. It is a UDL session. But Diffit is going to let us see, from a teacher's and an educator's perspective, how can we take a simple topic, a simple task, a simple thing that we've got to get across and aim for with our pupils, and actually not just differentiate it, because that obviously in converse UDL comes after the fact, but how do we create multiple versions, accessible versions of a piece of student-led work that gives our students options whenever they're approaching their learning. So we're going to be looking at all of those as we go through. Email addresses on the screen. Our good friends at ECS will, of course, have our contact details. By all means, reach out. We always get deluged after these events, and that's why we love doing them with our friends there. We've got lots of resources. At the end, Carrie-Ann is going to put up a single slide with 3 core resources that you're really, really going to need to be able to take away lots of the learnings from today. You'll get a copy of this presentation today as well, with all the links embedded. And also, I would encourage you, because of course I've mentioned Titanic, I've mentioned Belfast. We talk fast in Belfast. We talk with a fairly thick accent too. If closed captions helps you, or you need to use closed captions, don't forget you can enable that in your Zoom console. And that will of course be available on the recording as well. So enough about that. Let's get on, Carrie-Ann. Let's talk about a set of steps.
Yes, so the image on the screen right now might be familiar to some of you, but it's a picture of Robson Square in Vancouver. And this is an example that we always use of universal design. So if you had only steps here and without the ramp that's sort of weaved throughout that, that would be a barrier to some people. And that you might immediately spring to mind, well, if there's just steps there, how can a wheelchair access where this is going? But actually, when you think about it, it's making a barrier. It would be making a barrier there to so many more people. So by having the ramp weaved in there, it makes these steps and this area much more accessible for many, many reasons. So not just for wheelchairs, for bikes, for pushchairs, for people with suitcases and wheelie cases. So if there's one thing that we really want to take away here from today, it's that by removing barriers, removing barriers really for all students is fundamentally at the heart of UDL. It's, the whole idea behind it, and how removing one barrier can actually help more than maybe just that one person that you were initially thinking of. It might actually reach and remove barriers and reduce barriers for a lot more people. So really, to make your learning accessible by design, just think about throughout this, how can you take away or how can you reduce barriers by using the technology that we're going to show you today to sort of make the learning accessible for all students. So what is necessary for some is useful for all. There may be tools that some students would not be able to access and comprehend and sort of get through the lessons without. But those same tools are actually useful for each and every learner in the classroom.
And I think that's why a lot of people fall into that kind of thought process that when we're talking about UDL, that it always comes down to technology. It absolutely does not always come down to technology. Technology is just one of the approaches that we can take to provide one set of choices. But the advantage with a technological approach and integration within UDL strategies is exactly what Carrie-Ann's just said there, that we remove barriers for those people who have them, for those people who perhaps struggle unnoticed. We put the tools and the scaffolds in place there with technology. And for many other pupils, it may well be that it just gives them choice and voice through their learning. And that's the very basic concepts of UDL as we go. So I wanted to do a very quick recap before we jump into the technology piece. So we've been talking about UDL in very general terms, and there's a few things that for me, just a few thoughts that are going to lead into the structures that we can apply and how we can slot technology into that I think are fundamental. And Carrie-Ann's just going to touch on the 3 core areas of UDL in a second. But Carrie-Ann, there's kind of 3 there. I mean, what do they add up to when we're talking about UDL?
Yeah, so these, as you say, they're kind of the 3 core principles when it comes to UDL. So you've got providing multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of expression. So what that might look like, for example, in terms of engagement, is providing different opportunities for your students to get involved in the learning. So what that might look like is providing different interactive activities, maybe some group work, some online discussion boards, just providing students different ways to actually get involved and share their ideas and spark their interest in the topic that you're looking at. When we're thinking about multiple means of representation, that really in its simplest form would be something like offering both text and audio and or video format for the content that you're learning and the subjects that you're learning in the class. So it's given those sort of different ways for the students to access and learn about the subject. Thinking about multiple means of expression, that really comes down to allowing those students in your class the choice of how they actually show their learning. So maybe, obviously, there are times when there is only one way that they're going to be able to do that if it comes down to like a formal assessment or a formal exam. But in other ways where we have a bit more flexibility, you know, can we allow students, rather than only giving them the option of submitting an essay, a written piece, for example, can we allow them to, you know, maybe record a video, a podcast, do a slide presentation, create a poster sort of showing everything that they've learned. So it's about giving that choice to the student of how they actually show us what they've learned throughout the class. And really, you know, there are ways that we can really prepare when it comes to helping with the implementation of UDL, and flexibility really is the key here. So, you know, like we said, providing flexible study resources, flexible ways to learn, flexible ways to sort of access the content, flexible ways then to show that learning from the student to the teacher.
Thanks, Carrie-Ann. I'm actually just going to go back a slide rather than forward a slide. And what Carrie-Ann, you know, articulated so well there, you know, is the UDL framework. And I think sometimes, you know, when we talk about it, we think, right, well, actually, the way Carrie-Ann's explaining it, I get that, I understand that. But the challenge is taking that and actually taking what is a loose framework in one way, but a framework that has very defined checkpoints in it in another way, and actually translating that into practice. And so what I've done here is I really want you to start to think about, as we go through some of the technology tools, to experience how they would tie into that area of engagement and representation and expression. I'm hoping what you're going to see is that for some of the tools that you may choose to use in your classroom, and in fact may already be using them, actually can fulfill the role of those three things if we get the foundations right. And I'm going to challenge you to think about some of these tools as we go forward and have a think about whether indeed they do fill into all of these three areas of the UDL framework, or perhaps just one of them in your own head. I'm not going to ask you on group work or to come on camera for that, but just want you to think about it. So I'll guide you through that when we get there. But let's look at these fundamentals. So you got this framework as so well explained by Carrie-Ann. We know that we've got three core areas that we've got to focus on. But how do we start with that? What are the key building blocks? And we've been through most of these on the previous two sessions that we've had in this series. But number one for me is always prepare your space and your content. And we're going to delve into these a little bit deeper after we've had a look at some of the technology that we can use within UDL. But prepare your space. That may be something as simple as providing a range of materials, as an example. So we might say in a tech-enabled classroom, yes, we might have a Chromebook, but with that Chromebook, do we have a stylus because we have a pupil who may want to still write on the Chromebook? Equally, do we still have our pen and paper? And do we have the opportunity to use that? And then equally again, do we have headphones, for example, equipped in that classroom as well? So a pupil needs to listen to something, needs to have additional focus, needs to have text-to-speech because they're dyslexic. Any of those areas, have we prepared our space? And what does our content look like? Our last session, we delved into that in quite a depth, and do by all means go back and revisit that. But are our fonts right? Are they accessible? Is our content itself, those PDF resources that we have bought in or created ourselves, are they actually accessible to all of the tools that you may want to give your students options to use? Is the contrast right? Are we looking at light on dark or dark on light? Like, is the contrast right? Or are some of the words in those pieces actually almost blending into one because the contrast isn't right? There are small changes that we can make into that space and content type that can actually make a massive difference to the ultimate choice that we're giving to students. The next one is focus on goals. Again, we've been through that in the series. Imagine the ski map that I generally use. Think of the ski map. Think of being at the top of the mountain. What's the goal? To get to the bottom of the mountain, hopefully in one piece. So if we have that set up as a simple goal, go back to your ski map. And close your eyes for a second and imagine the schema. You've got those multiple routes down the mountain. You've got routes of challenge. You've got routes of just beginning to ski. You've got more complex routes, and you've got a straightforward route down. But ultimately, you have a choice. You're all still going to get to the goal at the end, which is getting down that mountain. But ultimately, you've provided and have been provided with choices in the way in which you do that, and the level of challenge, ease, or difficulty to get that. So one of the core fundamentals of UDL as we plan for it within teaching and learning and in classroom strategy is we need to move and very firmly focus on the goals of learning rather than the journey to get there. And that's really important, as you'll see as we go through. Identify and remove barriers is our next piece. And that, for a lot of educators that myself and Carrie-Ann would work with, it's probably the more difficult one. And here's why. You've heard the phrase, walk in my shoes. And the challenge is that you won't always see the barriers that your pupils or students may face in your classroom. But we do have to try our very best to minimize those where at all possible, rather than making accommodations after the fact. And that's core to UDL, removal of barriers. That may be in the content, that may be in the engagement, that may be in the involvement, that may be in the group work. What barriers actually exist in a specific lesson or in a specific set of pupils or students that you work with that actually we need to tackle and remove the barriers of? And that, if I'm being completely honest, is probably, for me, historically, the slower part of how you embed UDL, because you're always learning about the new barriers that pupils are facing, and you have to be on a consistent reflective view to remove those barriers as you go. And barriers, simple barrier today, I mentioned one at the outset, which was if I'm talking too fast, if my accent isn't clearly understandable, perhaps the captions would help with that. But that may be a barrier for some, but for others, they may just prefer to read those captions on screen because that's the way you'll process information better rather than simply listening. Maybe it's a case of muting me and reading. Maybe it's a case of listening to both. But simple technology pieces can help remove barriers to learning. And it's our job as UDL practitioners to identify and remove those. And then choice and opportunity are key. Do you know, in all the EdTech work that I do across the world, people go, Paddy, well, what's your biggest piece of advice? And the biggest piece of advice is not actually pedagogically driven. It's not framework driven like UDL, as much as I espouse those two things and really, really proactively encourage those things to be considered first and foremost. It's actually about giving pupils opportunity to use the technology in a way that suits them. That's not prescriptive. That's not necessarily time bound. And referring back to some of our previous slides, that is goal driven, that is about getting to the end result, regardless of the journey that they take to get there. And I know many of you will say, well, what about assessment, Paddy? We've got assessment approaches we've got to take. We've got to teach to a test. We've got to have a written exam. We've got to do an online piece. Yes, but the individual learning that we take on our steps towards that, we need to be flexible. So opportunity is key, and providing our pupils and students with the choice of how they get there and how they take that journey, much like our ski map that we talked about earlier, are absolutely key. And the last thing really on these intro points are that we must build a toolkit. If we're thinking about technology, technology is scary for many of us. Letting go in a classroom where we have 30 pupils or 20 pupils in a classroom and say, well, guys, you've got the technology, you got your Chromebooks, got your iPads, you got your PCs, got your Macs. Here's the learning goal, go. Not always such a great idea. Now, that is the UDL utopia of that we give ultimately an open-ended choice to our pupils, but actually to embed it well, we need some clear guidance to make sure that we're meeting the UDL checkpoints and that we're meeting the principles of UDL, and most importantly, meeting our learners on their level. So our recommendation always, as you embark or start to develop UDL practice, is to build a toolkit when it comes to technology. What are the tools that you think could get you the most return in your classroom, that provide pupils and students with the most number of options, that remove the most barriers of learning, that ultimately are the most flexible tools? For some of us in these budget conscious times, that may be which of those tools are free that I can use. but it may well be which of those tools give me the value that I need in my classroom to support students, to remove barriers, and ultimately give them choice. So that building a toolkit approach we're going to go to now, and we're going to think about good old Titanic. And this is a fairly complex page. In fact, sometimes you run this page through an AI engine, it actually comes back with an error message going, this is a very complex piece of text and we can't accurately simplify this page, and this can happen. So this is a very long piece, right? It's a really long piece. So, and I've deliberately chosen this when it comes to Titanic to say, look, this is a complex piece of work for anybody to read through. It would take any of us on this call as educators a long time to read through, process, and understand all the information that's on this. So how is this then useful to a student in 5th grade or in year 6 or whatever year bands you're using in the school you're teaching in at the moment? So how do you take a starting point like this? Okay, so a piece of technology, just a web page, and how do we enhance that with alternative routes to engagement, alternative routes to representation, and alternative routes to expression? In other words, how might we take this piece of learning? We know we want to learn the story of Titanic. We've got this web page as our starter. How do we get pupils interested in actually reading that web page? How do we get them interested in the topic? So how do we get them engaged? How do we represent this differently? Is a block of text the right thing to do for every one of your students? Is it at a higher level than it should be? It's Wikipedia, probably. Has it got enough images in it? Are those pieces relevant? Is it simplified? Is it readable? Is it the right font style? Or what are my dyslexic pupils going to do with some new words that they get in the vocabulary? Do we have different ways to represent this? And lastly, how would we express the learning? If we said to a pupil, we're going to do the Titanic piece, and I know I'm oversimplifying this, but we're going to do Titanic. What I want you to do is read the Titanic Wikipedia page, and I want you to give me 3 facts, 10 facts. I want you to write 1 paragraph on the sinking of the Titanic. I want you to write 3 bullet points of the reasons why Titanic sunk. But to summarize that piece of work and gain some understanding, can we give them technology tools that can express that in different ways? And of course, you all know the answer to that. It's a yes. There's lots of ways we can do that. So let me give you examples of some. So I'm going to just talk about some of them and show you some other ones. Simple things, YouTube. Of course, engagement, representation, expression. The use of video in learning gives pupils multiple ways to access that. So take the web page and go, instead, we're going to open up with a video Titanic. You're all doing this, I'm quite sure already, but this fits into UDL principles, different ways to approach it. And also, if you take a YouTube video and you switch on captions, you're removing even more barriers for even more students. So bear those in mind as you go. My favorite thing, perhaps, sometimes when it comes to UDL, and it's one of the most simple things, and of course it's free, every one of your devices has a microphone built in. So can we engage, represent, and express ourselves differently with a microphone? Of course we can. We could do group work to recruit interest, where we could have a group discussion. The Chromebook or the iPad is on, it's recording, and now we've got the ability to record that. Any pupil who needs it can listen to that back again. We've got different ways to represent content. Perhaps we could do a radio broadcast from the time to express that content of the announcement of the sinking of the Titanic. Perhaps we could do a play. Perhaps we could do a narration, but because we've got the microphone there, we've got multiple ways that we can engage. And trust me, when you hand a microphone to a bunch of pupils, no matter what age they are, they do tend to find very different approaches to actually using that within a classroom. So the microphone is such a powerful tool. And if you're not using it already on your devices, for me, it's a really fundamentally core part that enables UDL in lots of different ways for lots of different tasks, with some really easy and free tools. And we'll talk about some of those in a second. And then, of course, there's screen recording. So perhaps with screen recording, simple tool, it's built into your iPads, it's built into your Chromebooks. So it's all there for free. As a teacher, of course, you can record content. So you can, what does a good one look like? We can record a piece. We could record a worked example. We could record a talking point. We can share that with our pupils. Pupils can add closed captions, removal of barriers again. Pupils may still prefer the traditional approach that you might be taking, but other pupils may prefer just to use video. And then in terms of representation of that, we can have content represented through that form of video, and then we get to expression on that. And we can give students access and a reminder that they have the screen recorder tool. And that screen recorder will give them different approaches to express their learning. What have they learned from that Titanic piece? They could still have started off with a video, but they could have articulated and explained their learning through a screen recording. And of course, closed captions. My favorite thing in the whole world, after my dog, Charlie, it has to be said, who's around here somewhere, closed captions. Why? Because in one button click, with no hassle, with no effort, we've now got closed captions that can help so many of our children. It improves reading. It removes barriers. It enhances understanding. It helps our pupils where English isn't their mother tongue, for example, as well. Every pupil can win and benefit from closed captions. If you do one thing for me today, and Carrie-Ann's going to challenge you to do one thing, just get around closed captions in your classroom. The immediate removal of barriers that can take when you're showing something at the front of the room, and just remembering to press that CC button on Google Slides or on PowerPoint on your Windows machine or on your Macs, really fundamentally shifts how your pupils view content and understand it. And they can choose to do it. Back to UDL, they've got the choice to use that because it's there. You've enabled it. It's standard. Barriers are removed. Really, really important. So I'm not going to put the 3 color codes and explain through the next things, but some of the things that are really nice that you're probably already using that really fit into this sort of UDL structure and removal of barriers. This is the Educreations whiteboard, part of the Educreations pack. And there are, of course, 1,000 of these on the web at the moment, some free, some not so free. But giving a pupil the ability to write and record their voice in the case of this one, rather than having to do it necessarily pen or paper, you've given them a choice. You've given them a choice to add pictures and images from Google searches, for example, online to illustrate specific concepts. Think about the use of whiteboards and the additional flexibility they can offer. Many of you may well be using physical mini whiteboards in the classroom to create effect. Think about how you might use a digital whiteboard if technology is integrated into your classroom. And I want you to think as we go through these next few examples. Engagement, would that be more engaging for my pupils? Would it represent content differently? Could they use that as an expression tool to express their learning? It's a whiteboard. Of course they could. We've been using boards for years in all of our classrooms. And then, of course, there are things like Edpuzzle. And for me, Edpuzzle is a fabulous one because it not only integrates video content a different way with captions to engage and recruit interest in our learning, but it also gives us the ability to create quizzes on the back of that as well. And I'm no Edpuzzle expert, but I do absolutely love the tool. But effective ways of using that gives us a measurable piece of assessment out that, importantly for me in UDL, is self-paced. Because if you've used Edpuzzle before, you'll know you can run through a piece of video, there's a checkpoint, and there are some questions. But for a pupil, they can rewind, they can rewatch, they can go back, they can wait to get that checkpoint and get that assessment before they move forward. So from a UDL perspective, it lets them set their pace of learning and consume content the way they need to. But a switch around on that, of course, is put Edpuzzle in the hands of your pupils, and as a way to explain learning, get them to create the question banks directly out of Edpuzzle. Get them to create the learning material from that. But ultimately, come back to give them the choice with this tool. And I'm going to show you Diffit just for a minute or so here. And Diffit is different than what we've been talking about here. We've been talking about some examples, and we'll go back to more, some examples of tools that are put in the hands of your pupils and students that give them choice. One of the challenges sometimes when we're faced with UDL is going, do I have to reinvent the wheel? Are you asking me, Patty, Carrie-Ann, to recreate my wonderful resources that I have with the UDL framework in mind? Sometimes, yes, that's needed. Sometimes it's just putting in the removal of the barrier piece that we need to from that content. But what happens when you get to fresh material, a new topic, you've moved to a new year band and you're teaching something totally different and the resources aren't there for you? That's where things like Diffit come in, and I'll show you this one. And Carrie-Ann, do keep me right and just make sure that this should be showed directly on screen at the moment. Can you see that, Carrie-Ann, on screen? You've moved to the Diffit slide?
Yeah.
Yep. So this is Diffit. So what does Diffit do? Diffit lets me as a teacher ultimately put in a particular topic that I'm learning and effectively set the reading level on it. Now, what that means is I can change the reading level as I go, but I can also differentiate with the language material as well. Let me show you how easy this is to use. So I have set this as standard as 5th grade, and this goes all the way through K-12, and I've set it as English. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to put in Titanic. I see. Okay, so that's all I'm putting in. End of story. Don't have to put in anything more. The options I have here, I could have pasted a URL from online to a web page, the Titanic web page, or just posted a YouTube video in there, or copied and pasted some blurb, for example, a spec within there. But if I hit generate resources, okay, watch what this does. And in terms of creating content, many of you will have seen these online if you've been looking at AI. Diffit for me is one of those super special tools that actually comes from the heart of teaching and actually really starts to deliver. So if you see what's happened here, so there's Titanic. That's actually, well, there you go. There's a picture of my favorite city. There's a picture of Belfast. And that is the ship that took everybody to the Titanic, still there in Belfast. But now we've got, from the word Titanic, we've got an adapted reading passage. We've got summary bullet points. We've got key vocabulary words. We've got a multiple choice question bank within here as well. We've got short answer questions, and we've got open-ended prompts, for example, for writing. So think about that in the context of UDL. We've given multiple ways within that, within a good, strong lesson structure, to actually allow each of our sets of students to approach those. And this is going to tie into our grid approach that we've got. Now, that's great. But you're going, yeah, Paddy, that's super. Now I've got a page with stuff on it. What am I going to do with it? And the advantage with something like Diffit is we can press get student activities. Now, what can we do here? And think about this from a UDL perspective. We can go into printable pieces here. So if we've got students who prefer to take the paper approach, we've got the ability to create our resources here. We could create through technology an online quiz through Google. We could tie something into 5 Senses interactive slide. We could do workbooks, parts of speech. We could do short answer questions, causes and effects, graphic organizer. So for example, if I wanted to create a 3-2-1, what I learned in this, a summary workbook, okay, all I need to do is hit the button. And what it does is take all of the content that it's created. Oh, it's going to ask me to verify myself, of course, as well. And it's going to now create my Google slide resource for the classroom for me. And it's going to give that in the template that I had. Now I'm going to go back and show you how we can use this in a different way in UDL as well. So this will take a minute or two, and it's just going to go through the resource that it's created. So I'm going to say open Google Slides. And now what we'll have here is, from a teaching perspective, we now have our instruction page. We've got our image analysis page, our wonder page, and we've got our 3-2-1 what I've learned. And we've got our read and take notes piece. So we've got resources now here that can appeal in different ways to different students. Because we've got them in slides, we've given students the option to use a different range of tools. Can we add images to this? Can we draw on this? Can we type on this? Can we use voice dictation to type our notes? Can we use text to speech to listen to these? We've created a rich set of digital resources just by typing in the word Titanic and pressing 2 buttons as we go through. And remember, what we can also do is say, actually, the reading level for this is a little bit high. In my 5th grade class, I think we're at 4th grade here, and we can regenerate. And now we can level the reading at a different level within that as well. Not only that, is we can take the resources that have been created, and actually we can use the translate button that you'll see there. It'll just recreate these in 20 seconds or so, and we can move that into multiple languages. So now suddenly we've got something here that is sitting at a 4th grade reading level. Okay, the words are classed as 4th grade now. Got the ability to translate that to any language that we might actually need there, and we've got 99 languages on that. So I don't sell Diffit at all. I don't make any money off Diffit. None of us do. It's a free tool for the first part of this year. And I just think it's a wonderful way to go. How, if I'm struggling, do I create different levels of activity with different goals and a set of resources that could give my pupils options? And Diffit, I think, can really deliver that. Other things in terms of general technology is this. So Minecraft, of course, Minecraft now in case you haven't used it in a while, Minecraft for Education now has things like chemistry modules built in. So think about ways to recruit interest in the periodic table of elements. Immediately to me, this looks a lot more interesting because I can manipulate everything on this screen. I can start to build and articulate my learning within Minecraft as well. And if you look at a classroom where we remove barriers from so many pupils, Minecraft can really deliver on that because there are little inhibitions with using Minecraft. There doesn't need to be a voice. There doesn't need to be a struggle with text as an example as well, because it's a very visual medium. And we've got opportunities to represent content to engage our pupils and also to articulate our learning as well. So let's go back to Titanic really quickly here and think about the things that we could do with that. So of course, with Titanic, we could very simply reduce the reading level on something like that Titanic webpage. So think about this, not that we're asking you to do it, but think about presenting the toolkit to our pupils to give them the capability to deliver this. This is our own read and write from Texthelp, but this is the simplification feature. So this allows a pupil with a complex reading level or age, and such is the case of the Titanic Wikipedia page, to simplify that reading level down. And we can also do that, and we can change things like this, the line spacing. We can change things like the contrast, like the size of the font. Think about that carefully in terms of UDL. We've given pupils a tool. We've given them the choice, the guided choice to, you might want to use this tool. And now any barrier that sits in that classroom, pupil is dyslexic, pupil has ADHD and struggles with focus. A pupil is struggling at a lower reading level, as an example, and needs some additional helps and prompts. A pupil whose mother tongue is not English is finding new words. We've given them the tools there that they need to take that very complex initial piece of information and simplify it. And of course, I know none of you are going to start with the Titanic Wikipedia page, but it's a good way to describe a complex piece of text and move forward. And AI has its place in that as well, because AI now, the buttons, for example, in read and write, will take that complex web page, that piece of content. Pupils have the choice to use the AI tool, press one button, simplify that text, make it more readable, but keep the context the same in the understanding. You've all done this with ChatGPT. This is ChatGPT effectively in a safe and secure environment, presented to your pupils in such a way that it helps remove barriers, increase accessibility to learning. And that very simply will allow them to do things like you see on screen, to simplify the reading level, to simplify the complexity, to simplify the vocabulary, to give them an improved reading experience. Comes down to, have we got the goal right? Have we created the tools and provided those to students? And ultimately, come back to that recommendation. Have we given them the opportunity? And other ways that we can represent content and have pupils engage, simple free tools like word clouds. In a UDL classroom, this may well be Titanic, our opener, our talking point. Pupils may be engaging on that on a visual perspective. If pupils are, and UDL guidelines encourage this, of course, to be the case, are presented with this before the lesson is taught, they have an opportunity to engage with the vocabulary on the screen and explore that. New words, no problem. I'm presented this in an easy to understand way. I can identify the core words of this particular lesson, and I can find out more about those before. But also think then about the expression part. In the expression part, I may take a piece of text, an essay that I've written, a document that I've seen online. I can put it in by copy and paste into my word cloud editor. And now I've got a visual representation of that. I know what's important within there. For revision and review, this is a fabulous tool because you'll see keywords jump right out at you. These are different approaches to taking a similar piece of content, and this is just from that Titanic page, but it shows me the core things that I need to look at and also illustrates the new words that I may need to learn for this. And of course, it's true that simple things, let's not overplay complex technology. You've all got PowerPoint or Google Slides or Apple Keynote in all of your classrooms if you have devices equipped there. But encouraging pupils to use images and rich images when they're expressing learning and to engage them in that way is a core and fundamental part of UDL. And don't forget, when we start to use tools like Google Slides or like PowerPoint, we have those added accessibility pieces that help remove barriers. You can't understand those words. The maiden voyage of the Titanic had attracted a number of rich passengers. What does the word maiden mean? Right? We could highlight that word because we've got dictionaries built in. Suddenly, we've got an explanation of the word. We don't know how to pronounce the word maiden. Perhaps we can just listen to it read aloud. Now we've got a pronunciation of that word. These actually were barriers to learning that existed, but by literally using a piece of technology as simple as PowerPoint or Google Slides, we give them access to those tools. And of course, things like YouTube playlists there are rich to circulate as well. Mind mapping tools. This one is a tool called Poplet. And I do love Poplet. Have used it for many, many years since it was first created in 2012. Back then, it was very simple in terms of its approach, but now it's really feature rich. If you have a pupil who is approaching their learning and they are more engaged by images, or they need a supportive tool that can help them explore the connections between various components of the story, or simply chart that down as a precursor to writing a simple piece on Titanic. This is a fabulous way for any pupil to get their ideas down on paper and in a digital device. Don't forget, coming back to what Carrie-Ann said, this may well be really necessary for some of your students with individual needs, but actually for every single pupil in your classroom to have access to this, it's core to UDL fundamentals, but it means that we're giving them tools that are necessary for some, as Carrie-Ann said, and useful for every single student in the classroom. And what I never want you to think is, and the reason that Carrie-Ann started off with that piece, is that we're talking about providing some tools to some students. When it comes to technology, the whole focus and the whole purpose is to provide the toolkit that you decide to every single student. Remember, at all times, we're talking about removing barriers and increasing choice as we go. And of course, there are ways and other tools that we can use. So, for example, if we use this tool, we can use this tool to allow us to gather our information as we go. So on this board, what we've got of Padlet, we can now start to pull in content as we read. So perhaps you'll see there's a newspaper source, there's a photograph of the deck source, there's a route map, there's all of these pieces of information. But imagine a classroom environment where we've identified the goal. We want to understand the journey of Titanic or the reasons behind the sinking of Titanic, whatever we want to learn there within that particular topic. And we provide Padlet, we provide Google Slides, we provide a microphone built into your tools. We provide the accessibility tools, 4 or 5 tools, and we have a plethora of ways that students can approach their learning, all lined within UDL. And of course, Edpuzzle we saw earlier as well. And this Edpuzzle, this is just a multiple choice based on a simple video of the destination route that was took originally from Cork to France and across to Newfoundland. And Edpuzzle will give us a range of those and fully supportive environment as well. So go back to Titanic and think about some of those technology tools and think about how those tools may well be used. And we talk a lot here at Texthelp about text-to-speech, and I just want to take a second before we move on to some of the strategies and the grid strategy pieces in our last sort of 10, 15 minutes here. Text-to-speech is one of the most powerful things that we can give to a pupil. Why? Because, come back to Carrie-Ann, necessary for some, useful for all. Giving something like text-to-speech to a pupil who has dyslexia, incredibly useful, really helps reduce their cognitive load and helps aid comprehension and understanding as they read. They're not worried about decoding as much. But there are pupils who are at the top of your classes who just make those odd mistakes on an answer that they've written down in a book or typed in a document. Why? Because they're so confident that they don't listen to things back again, or they don't read things back again, they don't proof. I am guilty of that as the next person. I go, well, I've typed it, I'm sure it's okay. Actually, if I took time to read it back, I'd probably correct it a lot of times. But having text-to-speech there allows those pupils that have no individual needs, that have no perceived barriers to learning, but perhaps some hidden barriers to do better, to listen to words read back. It increases accessibility across all of the digital tools that you'll have. So whether this is coming from a standpoint of something like Read and Write, or our own tool built in, or whether it's coming from your built-in tools that is built into any of the tools that you may have on your machines. Text-to-speech, encouraging pupils to use it, giving them the opportunity to use it. For me, it's just one of those simple wins. It's kind of like closed captions. Just go, guys, you have text-to-speech. You can listen to your words at any time if you would prefer to do that. Reduce the screen time, put headphones on, listen to text-to-speech on the bus, in the train, in the car, on the way in the school. You've got ultimately different approaches to engage with learning. And of course, you can use your voice. So don't forget about simple focused tools that allow voice notes to be left. A pupil explaining how they've come to their conclusion of understanding of a particular new piece of content in their own words, or explained by their teacher or their peer, is a very powerful way. But think about that from a UDL perspective. That is a way to be able to consume content differently, to engage with it differently. And you can use tools like Mote and Vukaroo, and we've got links to all of these within the deck here if you want to explore. And what I'm going to do in the deck, I'm going to add one slide in, I'm just thinking after today, and just give you a recommended toolkit of 5 specific tools that can really help you. And when we think about tools in terms of different ways to engage, perhaps you've got a writing task. And you're saying, right, we're using devices for this. And actually, most of your pupils perhaps want to use Google Slides to actually articulate their learning. Or perhaps you're guiding them in such a way that you really do want something written or typed down. It's important that we provide the technology tools that can, say, help with prediction and can help with word development and can help pupils listen back to their typing. Or for me, and my favorite thing that really helps me out from UDL standpoint, my problem and my barrier is an odd one in that when somebody says to me, write a blog, Paddy, my thoughts come out far too fast. And so my typing literally can't keep up with the speed at which the words are coming out of my head. And what happens is I get very confused then at that stage, because I have so many thoughts at such a fast period of time that by the time I have typed out the first part of that thought, I have literally forgotten about the rest of that thought process and I lose my chain of thought, and I find it very, very hard to focus. What helps me out personally and what reduces my barriers? Hitting the microphone button and dictate. I can speak as fast as I want in my localized Belfast accent. Suddenly my words are on that page. Then it's up to me to edit them, to tidy them, to clear them. But that's removed a considerable barrier for me, and I know it does for many of your students. And of course, when you're thinking about those tools, we need to think about UDL within the tool itself. How actually can UDL be represented in the tool? How? By giving people multiple choices. That's the read and write toolbar you see on screen. Multiple ways to engage with content and make it more accessible. Think too, when you're looking at something like Poplet, have I given them different ways? Well, yes, because I've given them ways to put pictures in, to hand draw on screen, to type, to put an audio recording. I've given pupils one tool that gives them multiple choices. And Google Slides and PowerPoint are similar examples to that. Multiple ways to meet learning objectives. So let's start to look at, in the last 10 minutes or so, some of the guidance pieces that we'll give to you and some of these resources. So we do need to, and this is a very strongly held opinion by me, that in the early days of looking at UDL in your classroom and thinking through technology, it's important to pick that toolkit. And we've been through lots of different tools that you might consider, and we'll get you down to a narrow set of those as we finish off today. But it's important that we guide the choice in the early days. How do we do that? We need to give pupils a set of ways, but a set of sub-choices within that to approach an individual learning goal. So what do we need to do? I like to think about this on screen. Many of you will call this a game of noughts and crosses, I'm guessing. If you've born from or ever lived in America or the US of A, you may well call that tic-tac-toe. In Northern Ireland, we have a very peculiar expression, and we call it X's, because there are X's and there are O's, but it's a simple game. It's a 3x3 grid, and we all know how to play this. We've all played it before many times. But whatever you happen to call it, it actually has a place in learning within UDL. And I'm going to take a simple thing, and I'm going to talk about a book review, right? So it's a simple thing that we all have to do from time to time over our teaching, a simple book review. And we're going to put that into this noughts and crosses grid. Why might we do that? because we're thinking about a situation where our ultimate goal is to obtain that book review, because that's going to express understanding and that's going to show us what we've learned by that book. And if we take that, and this is a good way to start looking at how might I actually provide as much opportunity and choice for my students, but actually keep it guided so they're only going to work within the tools that I have decided to put in my classroom. And they do actually progress through levels of complexity. And if you think about this, we're not going to have time to go through all of these, but if I'm saying to my pupils, right, this is our guided list at this point, we still need to have UDL principles at the core of this. So we can say, look, and ChatGPT and another tool that I'm going to show you in just 1 second is going to help you create these. On the left-hand side, top left, draw a picture of the main character, right? That's good. Okay, so we've got an understanding of the main character. Moving through the middle section, make a poster that shows the order of events of the story. Okay, good. We've now got the progression through the book. We've read the book. We understand the book. And bottom right-hand side, to take it in that order, write 2 paragraphs about the setting. So pretty simple tasks that you would think about naturally in something like a book review. But we want to encourage our pupils to progress 1 from each column and move from left to right, right? And it's a good guided approach in my eyes to get us started with UDL. And as you develop as a UDL practitioner, that becomes more and more natural and doesn't need this. But imagine each of those 3 things. Draw a picture of the main character. Could you do that in Google Slides? Yes. Could you do that in the Education's whiteboard? Yes. Could you do that in Edpuzzle? Probably not, right? But you have a range of tools there from the toolkit you have, but also you have a pupil sitting there going, nope, I want an A0 bit of paper and I'm going to draw a picture with charcoals, right? But you've given the choice for pupils to take a physical tool or a digital tool. But ultimately, that simple goal there provides the choice of materials and approaches and tools to your pupil to achieve that. Make a poster just the same. Write 2 paragraphs. Think back to what I said earlier. Use dictation to do that. That means my barriers are gone. I can write 2 paragraphs really quickly. They should hopefully be quite articulate. They should hopefully be quite detailed and accurate, because I'm able to use the microphone to get my words down. But you may want to type, but you may still want to pick up an exercise book and a pen to do that as well. So I want you to think through in some sample lessons as you go forward, what could this grid actually look like? And where could I get help to produce this? Because as a starter point, it provides a guided, a subtle way to give our students enough of a range of activities through that particular lesson that we're looking, but encourage them to use their tools in front of them to actually achieve the goal and the objective that we're setting. So let's start to wrap up through this. And I want to summarize these few things, and then Carrie-Ann's going to give you a list of a couple of quick things. Firstly, what do? Identify the goals. Focus on the goal of learning, not the journey or their means. And I've put an example on there just as a really simple illustrative piece when it comes to UDL. So what we might have said, students will read about the cell cycle and be able to write a 5-paragraph essay explaining it, right? So that's the learning there. But actually, if we put that in UDL words, after exploring a variety of media about the cell cycle, you will be able to create a product that explains each step. That could be a video. That could be a diagram in a book. That could be a slide deck. That could be an audio recording. That could be a play. That could be anything. Ultimately, we're still achieving the same goal there, but we're providing that mountain view. We're providing those multiple ways to get there to the same piece. So think about how we might approach a lesson and identify the goals. Secondly, think about something that we've talked about lots today, how we might remove barriers. Identify those barriers at the earliest stage and work to remove them or minimize them across resources and tasks. This is the hardest one for me because the technology tools can be assembled, the choices can be made, but actually identifying those barriers, as I said earlier, is always an ongoing thing. Guide the choice. I had a very quick look at one sample grid. And if you want more of those, we've got loads of those available, and you can also get them on some of the AI tools that I'm going to show you just to wrap up. We need to structure the guidance for me in the beginning, but ultimately remember that UDL is about choice and keep that choice fluid and available within that. We need to provide the tools, assemble the toolkit. We'll give you a sample toolkit list that I always say to people that they must have as they're proceeding down a technology lens of UDL going forward. Our own toolbar Read and Write offers lots of those, but there are many tools that will be able to plug in to your toolkit, whether you're using Microsoft, Apple, Windows, anything that can help provide students with the choice, voice, and support they need. So finally, before we look at one last resource, what does a good one look like? Okay, so Waggle, if we're there and we're starting to embed UDL and we're looking at technology in the lens of technology, what does it look like if it's good? The goal is clear and the learner knows the goal. There are options to progress towards the goal. There's a focus on the relevance of the goal to the actual lesson. Why are we doing this? That's very important. Flexible options in the assessment, the output piece. We talked about it earlier in the grid. Learners have access to the options, the toolkits, the tools, the technology, and the resources from the very start, or even in best cases before the lesson. And for me, and this is something that's left behind sometimes in UDL, there always should be high expectations for expert learning. This is a learning path and approach within UDL that its ultimate goal, aside from removing barriers, aside from increasing access to all, is about creating expert learners. And that's a real core piece of UDL. And I wanted to show you this last thing before Carrie-Ann wraps up for us. And this is a tool called Ludia. And this was, I mentioned it earlier, it was created by Beth Stark, who's a wonderful UDL practitioner. And I really, really do love this tool. And I think it's worth showing. You've all probably used ChatGPT. So it's very similar to ChatGPT. It's a chatbot, and you can access it for free, and the link is in the slide deck. Why did I want to show it to you today? Because I've given you lots of information. I've given you lots of advice. You've looked at lots of tools, but sometimes you just want a Patty or a Beth or a Kitty Novak or a Carrie-Ann Gibson just there that you could just tap on and go, well, how do I do this? This is what Ludia can be for you, because this is built exclusively around UDL. So here's a very simple thing for me. I'd say, how might I use EdTech in my book review? Simple question you might ask blindly. How might I use EdTech in my book review lesson, right? And because this is accessible and it's UDL driven, we could, of course, just speak into that by using the microphone. So I can even just speak at this. But if I press send, okay, Ludia is built on UDL principles. It's built on UDL models. It's only ever going to give you UDL pieces back. So this is not about going to ChatGPT and asking complex questions. All I've said there is, how many use EdTech in my book review? It knows I'm looking to do this from UDL lens. So here we go. Here's options to consider: representation, audio recordings, ebooks, physical books, reading barriers, expression, using asynchronous EdTech tools like voice recordings, digital note-taking. So these are pretty obvious, straightforward things, but Ludia will give you a deep dive into these. So for example, I want to know more concrete examples of interactive online EdTech tools for engagement. And can you tell me how ebooks reduce reading barriers for students? And if I click that one as an example, it's going to go back to the UDL checkpoint, and it's going to give me a deep dive on why those things are important. Text-to-speech ability, I didn't rearrange this one. Text-to-speech abilities allow struggling readers or those still developing fluency to have content read aloud. This supports auditory learning. So this helps us guide us through our journey with UDL in multiple different ways. And absolutely, if you haven't checked this out, it is one of the most fabulous tools available for on-the-spot help and support for all things UDL going forward. So, Carrie-Ann, if you just finish off on these last few slides, we'll let people move on. I know, as usual, I've talked too much, but we've got 3 tools there, and you're going to provide links to those, I think.
Yes, absolutely. So we've got kind of 3 key takeaway resources here. So we will share these slides afterwards with ECIS and pass them on to everybody who's registered here today. But you will get a link to Ludia that Patty's just shown you there, where you can explore that more. It really is a fantastic tool. And if you're struggling with how to implement maybe an idea that you have, that will really help you with those UDL principles in mind. We have our own Texthelp UDL guide with some really easy to follow, guide there from, I think, Patty, you can show it on the screen there. Yeah. So everything sort of from the basics of UDL, how to implement it, how to use technology with it. So that will be freely accessible to everybody. I don't think you even need to sign in. The guide is just there for everybody. And then thirdly, we will have a link out to the CAST website. So CAST is essentially the oracle of all things UDL information and resources. So there's some fantastic information on that as well to sort of deepen your knowledge and understanding of UDL. So I know we're running out of time here, but I really want you to think about this one. You know, what is your +1 that you're going to do from today? Write it down, share it in the chat. If you want to, share it with us afterwards. But what's the one thing that we've looked at today that you can actually implement in your classroom to reduce the barriers for your students? You know, it might be Lydia, it might be looking at Texthelp's Read and Write, which we can absolutely help you with. It might be switching on those closed captions in your classroom, giving students more choice when it comes to, you know, to sort of handing in a piece of work. So what's the one thing, your +1 that you're going to do today and that you're going to commit to start putting these, you know, these guidelines and implementing UDL practice then in your classroom? And then lastly, I asked you at the beginning to sort of remember this phrase, necessary for some and useful for all. Really want to reinforce this. How can you remove or how can you reduce those barriers and those pain points for your students? What can you do? What can you take away from today that will make a big difference for all of your learners? Not just those one or two, but actually, you know, anybody with undiagnosed needs, undisclosed needs that maybe, you know, there's students that you know their challenges and their needs, and there are other ones that might be hidden. So what's one thing you can actually implement to, you know, to sort of take away those barriers and pain points for all of the students in your classroom?
I can tell you, Carrie-Ann, it's definitely assemble the toolkit and provide choice and opportunity for sure. And there's lots of support and help available in those tools that Carrie-Ann's given that can really help drive forward. So Carrie-Ann, I think that's us today, is it? Am I right?
Indeed, yes. So absolutely reach out to us. The email address is on there with any questions. We will share the slide deck and all the links and resources as well. And yeah, just drop us a line if you need any more information.
And I'll apologize to everybody, Carrie-Ann, for getting carried away and being 5 minutes over. I'm so passionate and enthusiastic about UDL, as is Carrie-Ann, that once you give us a platform with our good friends at ECIS, we could probably have talked for another hour there. So much information to go, but definitely, as Carrie-Ann says, reach out and we'll help exactly where we can and with any of those tools. But we'll get you a copy of this presentation for sure, and all the links will be embedded within that.
Yeah. And we will be at some upcoming ECIS events as well. So if anybody's going to that or any colleagues coming along, pop along and say hi to us in person as well.
Thank you. And just, I should say to everybody, if you saw me drinking coffee there, it was coffee. It was not a Belfast man drinking Guinness. A lot of people confuse those things on the screen. So thank you for everything today. And thanks to our friends at ECIS, as always.
Thank you, Paddy and Carrie-Ann. Absolutely fabulous. I think one of the things about all of these tools that you've helped us just to unpack some of them and take some of the fear away of just this massive choice that we have, and that lovely message of just sort of, you know, take one, work with it, and then start building up the toolkit rather than feeling overwhelmed by the number of different options that are there. But you simplify it for us so that it seems accessible, and how powerful that is for personalized learning in the classroom and being able to, yeah, by removing those barriers, being able to increase the accessibility. So thank you so much once again today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.